Welcome back to the channel, everyone, where everyday pocket change turns into unbelievable fortunes and hidden treasures are waiting in plain sight. And today we're diving deep into one of the most mysterious, controversial, and talked about modern US coins ever whispered about in collector circles, the 1979 D Washington quarter, a coin that millions of Americans have held, spent, or ignored without realizing that under extremely rare circumstances, certain versions of this ordinary-looking quarter have been rumored, speculated, and passionately debated as being worth up to an astonishing $39 million, and while that number sounds unbelievable at first, the journey to understanding how such a value could even be possible reveals a fascinating world of minting errors, production anomalies, transitional metal mysteries, die varieties, misaligned strikes, planchet irregularities, experimental compositions, collector psychology, auction hype, and the powerful role that scarcity combined with narrative plays in the numismatic market. Because the truth is that coins don't become valuable simply because they are old or shiny, they become valuable when something goes wrong at exactly the right moment, and only a microscopic number of examples escape the mint. And in the case of the 1979 D quarter, struck at the Denver Mint during a period of massive production pressure, equipment wear, and material experimentation, the perfect storm of conditions existed for some of the most dramatic mint errors ever theorized for a clad quarter, starting with the fact that 1979 was a year when the U.S. Mint was operating at full throttle, producing hundreds of millions of quarters to meet circulation demand, which dramatically increased the likelihood of mistakes slipping through unnoticed, especially at the Denver facility where quality control was overwhelmed by volume, leading to documented cases of off-center strikes, broad strikes, clipped planchets, doubled dies, weak strikes, and die deterioration errors. But what pushes certain alleged 1979 D quarters into legendary territory is the possibility of wrong planchet strikes, particularly coins believed to have been struck on experimental or leftover silver planchets, foreign planchets, or transitional metal blanks intended for other denominations. A mistake that, if verified, would instantly elevate a common quarter into the realm of museum-grade rarity, because by 1979 quarters were officially copper, nickel-clad with no silver intended for circulation, meaning that any genuine silver or anomalous metal strike from that year would represent a catastrophic mint error of historic proportions, and collectors obsess over subtle clues like unusual weight, distinct ringing tones, magnetic behavior, edge coloration, and surface texture to identify these anomalies, with some reported examples weighing significantly more or less than the standard 5.67 grams, suggesting the use of incorrect planchets that were never meant for quarters at all. And then there are the double die varieties, which occur when the hub impresses the design onto the die more than once at slightly different angles, resulting in dramatic doubling visible on the lettering of Liberty, Indiana God We Trust, or the date itself, errors that can multiply a coin's value exponentially depending on clarity and rarity. And while most double dies are minor, a strong, well-defined double die on a 1979 D quarter would already place it into the thousands or hundreds of thousands range, but when combined with additional errors like off-metal strikes or mint-state preservation, the valuation becomes speculative and explosive, feeding into multi-million-dollar conversations, especially when only one or two examples are believed to exist. And beyond doubled dies, collectors hunt for rotated dies where the reverse is misaligned relative to the obverse, sometimes by 90 or even 180 degrees, an error that proves the dies were improperly installed or loosened during striking. And while many rotated die coins exist, extreme rotations combined with other errors are extraordinarily rare and can command astronomical prices. And then there's the fascinating category of struck-through errors, where grease, cloth fibers, metal shavings, or debris obstruct the die during striking, leaving ghostly voids or distorted details on the coin's surface, each one a unique fingerprint of a momentary failure inside the mint. And when such errors appear on high-grade 1979 D quarters with minimal circulation wear, they become one-of-a-kind artifacts, because no two struck-through errors are identical, making them irresistible to elite collectors who value uniqueness above all else. And uniqueness is a driving force behind the rumored $39 million valuation, because at that level, coins are no longer bought as money. They are acquired as trophies, historical evidence, and investment vehicles for ultra-high net worth individuals who compete not just for ownership but for legacy. And this is where myths and realities blur, because not every 1979 decoder with a scratch or discoloration is valuable, but in rare cases where multiple verified mint errors converge in a single coin, the numismatic world takes notice, especially when third-party grading services authenticate and certify the piece as genuine, assigning it a mint error designation that confirms it could not have been altered after leaving the mint, and certification is critical because without it, even the most dramatic error is treated as damaged pocket change, but with it, the coin enters a global marketplace where auction houses, private collectors, and museums compete, and the moment two wealthy bidders lock horns over a coin believed to be unique, prices can spiral into previously unimaginable territory, driven not just by metal or age, but by story, prestige, and bragging rights, and the 1979 decoder story is amplified by its deceptive normalcy. Because unlike ancient coins or gold pieces, it looks like something anyone could find in a drawer, which fuels viral excitement, treasure hunt psychology, and endless searching through rolls of quarters. And this psychological component cannot be underestimated, because the belief that life-changing wealth could be hiding in plain sight is one of the most powerful motivators in collecting. And it's why rumors of a $39 million quarter continue to circulate, evolve, and inspire even when only a handful of extreme error coins might ever justify such a valuation. And then there are the transitional error theories, suggesting that leftover planchets from experimental runs or foreign contracts accidentally entered the quarter production line, a scenario that has precedent in U.S. mint history, as proven by famous errors like the 1943 copper cent and 1974 aluminum cent, which were never meant to exist yet sold for millions because they represent official mistakes frozen in time. And if a genuine 1979 decoder struck on an unintended metal were confirmed with full documentation, metallurgical analysis, and grading service approval, it would instantly join this elite class of forbidden coins, making the $39 million figure not a fantasy but a theoretical ceiling driven by precedent, scarcity, and demand. And condition plays an equally critical role, because an error coin in poor condition loses much of its appeal, whereas a mint-state example with sharp details, original luster, and minimal contact marks becomes exponentially more valuable, especially when paired with dramatic errors that are visually obvious even to non-collectors. And that visual impact matters in auctions, because coins that photograph well generate hype, bidding wars, and headlines, further inflating their perceived value. And this is how ordinary years like 1979 transform into legends, not because every coin is rare, but because a microscopic fraction defies the rules, and those exceptions become symbols of chance, timing, and human error. And whether or not a 1979 decoder ever officially sells for $39 million, the possibility alone keeps collectors searching, learning, and paying attention. Because the next great discovery in numismatics has always come from someone who refused to believe that everything valuable had already been found. Next, 1981 D Washington quarter dollar. We're stepping into another astonishing chapter of modern American coin mysteries by uncovering how the 1981 D Washington quarter dollar, a coin so common that millions pass through hands without a second thought, has become associated with rumors, records, and jaw-dropping valuations reaching as high as $37 million. A number that sounds impossible until you understand the rare combination of timing, minting pressure, mechanical failure, and human oversight that surrounded its production at the Denver Mint, because 1981 was a transitional, stressful, and often overlooked year for U.S. coinage, a year marked by economic uncertainty, heavy demand for circulating coinage, aging equipment, and cost-cutting measures that pushed mint facilities to prioritize speed over perfection, and whenever speed outruns precision, the door opens for extraordinary mistakes, and mistakes are where legendary coins are born. Because a valuable coin is rarely planned, it is almost always an accident, and the 1981 decoder sits at the intersection of massive output and microscopic anomalies, making it fertile ground for some of the most dramatic error scenarios imaginable, starting with the fact that Denver struck hundreds of millions of quarters that year, an overwhelming volume that increased die fatigue, loosened tolerances, and reduced inspection effectiveness, which in turn raised the probability of off-center strikes, broad strikes, misaligned dies, weak strikes, and improperly seated planchets escaping into circulation. And while most of these errors are minor and relatively affordable, the mythos surrounding the $37 million valuation centers on extreme and compounded errors, the kind that occur once in tens or hundreds of millions of strikes. Such as wrong planchet errors where a quarter is struck on a blank intended for another denomination or even another country, producing dramatic weight, thickness, and appearance differences that are immediately apparent to trained eyes. And in the case of the 1981 D quarter, collectors speculate about strikes on leftover silver planchets, experimental alloy blanks, or foreign contract planchets that were present in mint facilities during that era. Because while official policy dictated copper-nickel clad composition, history has proven again and again that stray planchets do find their way into the wrong presses, and when they do, the resulting coin becomes an unrepeatable artifact. And unrepeatable artifacts are the foundation of 7- and 8-figure numismatic values, especially when supported by metallurgical testing that confirms composition anomalies beyond any doubt, and weight plays a crucial role here, because a standard 1981 quarter should weigh approximately 5.67 grams. So any significant deviation raises immediate red flags, with heavier coins suggesting silver or denser alloys and lighter coins hinting at aluminum or experimental metals, and collectors also analyze edge coloration closely, because a solid silver or off-metal quarter will lack the telltale copper stripe visible on clad coinage, and when such a coin is found in high mint state condition, showing no signs of post-mint alteration, its credibility skyrockets, drawing the attention of grading services, auction houses, and elite collectors who specialize in modern mint errors, and beyond wrong planchet strikes. Double die errors play a major role. In the 1981 D quarter legend, occurring when the die receives multiple impressions from the hub at slightly misaligned angles, creating visible doubling on lettering, numbers, or design elements, and while minor doubling is common and often ignored, dramatic hub doubling that is bold, clear, and widespread is extraordinarily rare, and a strong double die affecting the date, Washington's profile, or inscriptions like Liberty and I in God We Trust can elevate a quarter's value from face value to thousands or even hundreds of thousands instantly. And when such doubling is paired with other anomalies like off-metal composition or misalignment, the valuation discussion leaps into uncharted territory, because collectors prize compounded errors far more than single faults, viewing them as statistical miracles. And then there are rotated die errors, where the reverse is misaligned relative to the obverse, sometimes by extreme angles approaching 90 or 180 degrees, indicating that the dies were improperly installed or loosened during operation. And while mild rotations are known, extreme rotations on high-grade coins are scarce, and scarcity is the oxygen of value. And when you add dramatic visual impact to scarcity, you create bidding wars, because coins that immediately look wrong capture attention even from non-collectors, making them ideal headline pieces for auctions. And auctions thrive on spectacle, because spectacle attracts competition, and competition inflates prices. And this psychological dynamic is essential to understanding how a coin like the 1981 D quarter could theoretically approach $37 million under perfect circumstances, not because every example is valuable, but because one extraordinary survivor could become the focal point of global attention, and struck through errors further deepen the mystery, where grease, metal shavings, cloth fibers, or debris interfere with the strike, leaving voids, distortions, or ghostly impressions on the coin's surface, each one a unique snapshot of a fleeting moment inside the mint. And uniqueness is priceless in a field where most coins are identical, and a dramatic struck-through error on a mint-state 1981 D quarter, especially one affecting major design elements, becomes a one-of-one artifact that no amount of money can replicate. And then there are die cracks, breaks, and cuds, physical failures of the die itself that create raised blobs or missing sections on the struck coin. And while small die cracks are common, massive cuds that obliterate significant portions of the design are rare, especially when found on coins with minimal wear, because such dies are usually retired quickly, limiting the number of coins struck. and when a cut error appears early enough to retain sharp detail and original luster, it becomes a prime candidate for elite collections. And elite collections operate under different rules than casual collecting. Because at the highest level, buyers are not constrained by budgets but by opportunity, and when an opportunity presents itself in the form of a unique, certified, historically significant error coin, price becomes secondary to acquisition, and this is how theoretical valuations reach surreal levels. Especially when the coin is encapsulated by a respected third-party grading service that verifies its authenticity, assigns it a high grade, and documents its error characteristics in precise language that leaves no room for doubt, and certification transforms curiosity into legitimacy, legitimacy into desirability, and desirability into competition, and competition is what pushes numbers from 6 figures to 8 figures, and the 1981 decoder's allure is amplified by its deceptive normalcy, because unlike gold coins or ancient artifacts, it looks like something anyone could find, reinforcing the dream that life-changing wealth might be hiding in plain sight, and that dream fuels relentless searching, roll hunting, and online discussion, keeping the legend alive and ensuring that even decades after its release, the coin remains relevant, debated, and emotionally charged. And emotional charge matters, because collectors are not purely rational, they are storytellers, historians, and dreamers, and a coin that embodies error, chance, and hidden value speaks directly to those instincts. And historical precedent strengthens the case, because the numismatic world has already witnessed modern mistakes achieve staggering prices, proving that age alone does not define value, rarity and narrative do, and if a single 1981 decoder were ever confirmed as a wrong metal strike with dramatic visual errors and pristine preservation, it would not just be a collectible, it would be a cultural event, covered by media, discussed by experts, and chased by institutions. An institutional interest is the final accelerant, because when museums, investment funds, and private foundations enter the bidding arena, prices detach from traditional logic and respond instead to prestige, legacy, and the desire to own something that will never exist again. And whether or not the $37 million figure is ever realized, the very possibility reshapes how people look at their change, reminding everyone that perfection is rare, mistakes are inevitable. And sometimes those mistakes escape into the world carrying value far beyond their humble beginnings, turning a simple 1981 decoder into a symbol of how chance, error, and curiosity can collide to create something truly priceless. Next, 1990-60 Washington quarter dollar. We're diving into one of the most fascinating modern coin legends ever whispered among collectors and treasure hunters, the 1990-60 Washington quarter dollar, a coin minted in staggering numbers at the Denver Mint yet surrounded by speculation, rare discoveries, and theoretical valuations reaching an unbelievable $31 million. A figure that sounds outrageous until you understand how modern coin production, extreme minting pressure, transitional manufacturing practices, and once-in-a-generation errors can collide to create numismatic lightning in a bottle, because 1996 was not just another year in American coinage, it was a pivotal moment when the U.S. Mint was producing coins at massive scale to meet circulation demand while also preparing for upcoming design and production changes. And whenever production volume surges, the probability of catastrophic mistakes rises exponentially, not because workers are careless, but because machines wear faster, dies degrade sooner, planchets move quicker, and quality control becomes a race against time, and the Denver Mint in particular was operating under intense pressure, striking hundreds of millions of quarters that year, which set the stage for anomalies ranging from subtle die varieties to dramatic off-metal strikes. And while most 1990-60 quarters are worth face value, the extraordinary few that deviate from the standard formula are where legends are born, because the numismatic world does not reward the average, it rewards the exception, and the $31 million valuation attached to the most extreme 1990-60 quarter scenarios stems from the possibility of compounded, verified mint errors that should never have existed, starting with wrong planchet strikes, one of the most powerful error categories in all of coin collecting, where a quarter is struck on a blank intended for another denomination, another alloy, or even another country, creating immediate and measurable differences in weight, thickness, color, sound, and composition, and collectors obsessively weigh suspect quarters because a standard 1996 quarter should weigh approximately 5.67 grams, so any deviation raises alarms, especially when paired with visual clues like a missing copper core stripe on the edge or an unusually bright or dull surface that suggests silver. Experimental alloys, or foreign metals, and while the mint officially ended silver quarter production decades earlier, history has repeatedly proven that leftover planchets, test blanks, or foreign contract materials can and do accidentally enter production lines, resulting in forbidden coins that rewrite collecting history. And if a genuine 1996 quarter struck on an unintended metal were authenticated through metallurgical analysis and third-party grading, it would instantly join the same legendary category as coins that shattered valuation ceilings in the past, because at that point the coin would no longer be judged by denomination or age, but by uniqueness, documentation, and impossibility. And impossibility is priceless in numismatics, and beyond wrong planchet errors, doubled die varieties add another layer of intrigue, occurring when the die receives multiple impressions from the hub at slightly different angles, producing visible doubling on inscriptions like Liberty, Indiana God We Trust, or the date itself, and while minor machine doubling is common and adds little value, true hub doubling that is strong, crisp, and widespread is extremely rare, especially on late 20th century quarters, and a dramatic double die on a 1996 quarter would already command serious money, but when combined with other anomalies like off-metal composition, misalignment, or pristine mint-state condition, it becomes the kind of statistical anomaly that collectors dream about and auction houses salivate over, because compounded errors are exponentially rarer than single mistakes, and rarity multiplied by visual impact multiplied by condition equals explosive value potential. And then there are misaligned and rotated die errors, where the obverse and reverse are improperly aligned, sometimes by extreme angles that are immediately obvious when the coin is flipped, signaling mechanical failure during die installation or press operation, and while minor rotations exist, extreme rotations on high-grade modern quarters are scarce, and scarcity is the heartbeat of the collector market, because when supply collapses to one or two known examples, demand no longer competes with quantity, it competes with desire, and desire has no fixed ceiling, especially when wealthy collectors seek trophies rather than bargains, and struck-through errors further elevate the mystique of the 1996 quarter, capturing the exact moment when grease, cloth, metal fragments, or debris interfered with the strike, leaving behind voids, distortions, or ghostly impressions that cannot be replicated or forged, making each struck-through coin a unique artifact of industrial failure, and uniqueness is one of the few qualities that transcends all other valuation metrics, because even the rarest standard coin has equals somewhere, but a dramatic struck-through error has no twin, and when such an error appears on a coin that retains full luster, sharp strike, and minimal contact marks, its desirability skyrockets. Because condition magnifies every other attribute, turning curiosity into obsession, and then there are die cracks, die breaks, and cuds, physical failures of the die that leave raised metal blobs or missing sections of design on the struck coin, and while small cracks are common in high-volume years like 1996, massive cuds that consume large portions of Washington's portrait or the eagle's wings are rare, especially when found on coins that show little to no circulation wear. Because such dies are usually pulled quickly, limiting the number of examples produced. And when a dramatic cut appears early in a die's failure, producing coins that retain sharp detail and mint-state surfaces, it creates a narrow window of rarity that collectors recognize instantly. And at the highest levels of collecting, recognition matters as much as rarity, because a coin that experts immediately understand and respect becomes a centerpiece rather than a curiosity. And centerpiece coins are where multimillion-dollar conversations happen, and certification plays a decisive role in this transformation, because without third-party verification, even the most astonishing error is treated with skepticism. But once a respected grading service authenticates the coin, assigns it a high grade, and documents its error characteristics in precise language, the coin enters a different universe, one governed by auctions, private treaties, institutional acquisitions, and long-term investment thinking. And institutions operate under different motivations than individuals. Because they acquire objects for legacy, education, and prestige, not just profit. And when an institution decides that a coin represents an irreplaceable chapter of mint history, price becomes negotiable, especially if the coin is unique, or nearly so. And this is how theoretical valuations like $31 million enter the conversation, not as guarantees, but as reflections of what could happen if the perfect storm of rarity, condition, documentation, and demand converges in a single object. And the psychological power of the 1996 quarter legend lies in its familiarity, because unlike ancient gold or colonial relics, it feels attainable, something that could still be hiding in circulation or forgotten collections, and that belief fuels relentless searching, roll hunting, and online discussion, keeping the story alive and ensuring that even decades later, the coin remains emotionally charged, debated, and desired. And emotional desire is the invisible force behind every record-breaking sale, because people do not pay millions for metal, they pay millions for meaning, and the meaning of a modern-era coin is deeply tied to chance, timing, and the idea that perfection is fragile, that even in an age of advanced technology, mistakes still slip through, carrying stories that outlive their creators, and whether or not a 1996 quarter ever officially sells for $31 million. The possibility alone reshapes how collectors view modern coinage, reminding everyone that rarity is not confined to the distant past, and that sometimes the most valuable treasures are born not from intention, but from error, preserved by luck, and discovered by those curious enough to look closely at what everyone else ignores. Because looking closely is what separates the casual spender from the discoverer. And the legend of the 1996 quarter continues to grow precisely because it rewards attention, patience, and understanding of how fragile perfection really is inside a high-speed minting environment, where presses strike thousands of coins per minute, and even a fraction of a second malfunction can leave behind a permanent anomaly that survives decades unnoticed. And one of the most compelling drivers behind the $31 million valuation theory is the idea of convergence. The rare moment when multiple independent errors occur together on a single coin, something so statistically unlikely that it borders on impossible, yet history has proven that impossibility is not a barrier in numismatics, because when volume is massive and oversight is human, mistakes compound. And the 1996 quarter sits squarely in a year where dies were pushed hard, planchets moved fast, and inspection was selective, rather than exhaustive, increasing the odds that an extreme error could slip through undetected, and collectors studying alleged ultra-high-value examples often point to abnormal strike pressure, where design elements appear unusually sharp or unnaturally flat, suggesting improper press calibration, which when combined with off-center alignment can create coins that look dramatically different from standard issues. And dramatic difference is essential at the top of the market, because subtlety does not generate headlines, and headlines drive demand, and demand drives valuation. And then there is the topic of missing clad layers, a rare but documented phenomenon where one side of the copper-nickel cladding fails to bond properly to the copper core, resulting in a coin that appears copper on one side and nickel on the other, or exhibits exposed core metal, and while partial clad errors are already valuable, a full missing layer on a pristine 1996 quarter would be extraordinary, especially if paired with additional anomalies like die doubling or rotation, because each added layer of error reduces the population exponentially, and population is the ultimate governor of price, because when population approaches 1, price becomes theoretical rather than comparative, and theoretical prices are shaped by precedent, emotion, and competition rather than catalog listings. And precedent tells us that when a modern coin challenges what is supposed to be possible, collectors respond aggressively, as seen in past era discoveries that redefined entire series, and the Washington Quarter Series, long viewed as common and utilitarian, becomes electrifying when confronted with a coin that violates its own rules, because it forces collectors to reevaluate assumptions about modern minting perfection, and that reevaluation generates scholarly interest, media coverage, and institutional curiosity, all of which amplify perceived importance, and importance is what elevates a coin from collectible to cultural artifact, And cultural artifacts attract buyers who are not constrained by traditional collecting budgets, because they view acquisition as preservation of history rather than expenditure, and preservation justifies price. And another factor that cannot be ignored is timing, because the market environment matters enormously. And a unique 1996 decoder appearing during a period of heightened interest in modern eras, viral social media exposure, and global auction participation would command far more attention than the same coin discovered quietly decades earlier, and attention is currency in the modern collecting world, because it creates narrative momentum, and momentum attracts bidders who fear missing out on owning something that will be talked about for generations, and fear of missing out is a powerful accelerant, especially when supply is fixed at one. And once 2 or 3 motivated bidders enter that psychological space, numbers escalate quickly, sometimes irrationally, but irrationality is not uncommon in markets driven by prestige and scarcity, and the grading label itself becomes part of the object's identity, because a coin encapsulated with a detailed error description and a top-tier grade is no longer just metal, it is a certified statement recognized globally, portable, insurable, and tradable at the highest levels. And that portability matters, because it allows wealth to be stored in a form that is both historical and liquid, appealing to collectors who view rare coins as alternative assets, and alternative asset investors think differently than hobbyists, because they compare coins to art, wine, watches, and artifacts, categories where 8-figure prices are not shocking when uniqueness and provenance align, and provenance is another pillar of extreme valuation, because the documented discovery story of a coin can add emotional weight. Whether it was found in circulation, a mint employee's estate, or an old bank vault, and a compelling provenance humanizes the object, making it relatable while simultaneously elevating it to legend, and legends are what endure, and endurance matters because long-term value is tied not just to rarity but to remembrance, and the more a coin is discussed, written about, and referenced, the more entrenched it becomes in the collective consciousness of the collecting community. And the 1996 decoder's legend persists because it embodies the ultimate paradox, being both modern and mythical, common in appearance yet extraordinary in potential, and that paradox keeps collectors engaged, because it suggests that discovery is not limited to museums or ancient hoards, but can still happen in everyday life, reinforcing the democratic allure of coin collecting, where anyone with curiosity can participate, and this participatory aspect fuels constant searching, learning, and sharing, keeping the story alive even when no confirmed $31 million sale has occurred, because in numismatics, belief often precedes proof, and belief sustains interest until proof finally emerges, and when proof does emerge, it tends to exceed expectations rather than merely meet them, and that is why the 1996 decoder continues to be discussed in the same breath as the most famous mint errors in American history, not because every example is special, but because one extraordinary survivor could exist, waiting to redefine what modern coins are capable of becoming. Reminding everyone that value is not always planned, perfection is not guaranteed, and sometimes the smallest mistakes leave the largest legacies, turning a simple quarter into a symbol of chance, history, and unimaginable worth. Next, 1994 P. Washington quarter dollar, and today we journey into another jaw-dropping chapter of modern American numismatics by uncovering how the 1994 P. Washington quarter dollar, a coin struck at the Philadelphia Mint and released quietly into circulation, has become associated with rumors, theories, and mind-bending valuations reaching as high as $28 million. A figure that seems impossible until you understand how rarity is born not from intention but from error pressure, and the unpredictable nature of mass production, because 1994 was a year when the U.S. Mint was operating under intense demand, aging equipment, and constant efficiency targets, producing hundreds of millions of quarters to satisfy nationwide circulation needs, and when production reaches that scale, even the smallest deviation can snowball into a historic anomaly. And it is within this environment that the legend of the 1994 P quarter takes shape, not as a coin everyone owns, but as a coin that under extremely rare circumstances becomes something the mint never meant to create, something that challenges assumptions about modern perfection, and collectors who study this year closely point out that Philadelphia, unlike Denver or San Francisco, produced coins without mint marks during many periods, making attribution dependent entirely on subtle diagnostics. Which adds another layer of intrigue and complexity, because identifying a true Philadelphia struck error requires deep knowledge, precision measurement, and third-party verification, and that barrier alone filters out casual claims, leaving only the most extraordinary examples to enter serious discussion, and the $28 million valuation theory is rooted in the possibility of extreme, compounded mint errors that converge in a single surviving coin, beginning with wrong planchet strikes. One of the most powerful value multipliers in all of numismatics, where a quarter is struck on a blank intended for another denomination, alloy, or even another country, creating immediate and measurable differences in weight, thickness, color, and edge composition, and a standard 1994 quarter should weigh approximately 5.67 grams with a copper-nickel clad structure, so any deviation from that norm becomes the first alarm bell for collectors. Especially if the edge lacks the familiar copper stripe or the surface exhibits unusual luster, texture, or tone inconsistent with standard clad coinage, and while silver quarters were officially discontinued decades earlier, the U.S. Mint's own history proves that leftover planchets, experimental blanks, and foreign contract materials have occasionally crossed paths with domestic production lines, producing forbidden coins that were never meant to exist, and when such coins are authenticated through metallurgical testing that confirms anomalous composition beyond any doubt, they instantly transcend normal valuation logic, because at that point the coin is not judged against others of its kind, it stands alone, and standing alone is the foundation of multimillion-dollar value, and beyond composition errors, double die varieties play a critical role in the mythology of the 1994 P quarter, occurring when the working die receives more than one misaligned impression from the hub, producing true doubling visible on lettering, numbers, and design elements. And while minor machine doubling is common and often dismissed, true hub doubling, that is, bold, crisp, and clearly separated, is exceptionally rare on late 20th century quarters, and a dramatic double die affecting the date, Liberty, or Washington's profile would already place a 1994 P quarter into elite territory, but when paired with other errors such as off-metal composition, misalignment, or pristine mint state preservation, the coin enters the realm of statistical impossibility, where collectors stop asking how much it is worth and start asking whether they will ever see another one again. And that shift in mindset is crucial, because value explodes when comparison disappears, and misaligned die errors add further fuel to the legend, where the obverse and reverse designs are improperly aligned, sometimes by extreme angles that are immediately visible when the coin is flipped, signaling mechanical failure during die installation or press operation, and while slight rotations exist, extreme rotations on high-grade modern quarters are scarce, and scarcity amplifies everything, because it tightens supply while curiosity expands demand, and struck through errors deepen the mystery even more, capturing the precise moment when grease, cloth fibers, metal fragments, or debris interfered with the strike, leaving behind ghostly voids, distorted devices, or missing details that cannot be duplicated or convincingly faked, making each struck-through coin a unique industrial fingerprint. And uniqueness is the most valuable currency in collecting because even the rarest standard coin has equals, but a dramatic struck-through error has none, and when such an error appears on a coin that retains original luster, sharp detail, and minimal contact marks, its desirability multiplies, because condition magnifies rarity, turning curiosity into obsession, and die cracks, breaks, and cuts represent another pathway into extraordinary value, where the die itself physically fails, leaving raised metal blobs or missing sections of the design on the struck coin, and while minor cracks are common in high-volume years like 1994, massive cuts that erase large portions of Washington's portrait or the eagle's wings are rare, especially when found on coins that show little to no circulation wear, because such dies are usually retired quickly, limiting the number of coins struck, and when a dramatic cut appears early in a die's failure, producing coins that retain sharp strike and mint-state surfaces, it creates a narrow window of rarity that advanced collectors recognize instantly. And recognition matters because at the highest levels of collecting, coins are not just bought, they are curated, and curated objects are chosen for significance, narrative, and long-term legacy. And this is where certification becomes decisive, because without third-party authentication, even the most astonishing error is treated with skepticism. But once a respected grading service encapsulates the coin, assigns a top-tier grade, and documents its error characteristics in precise language, the coin crosses a threshold into legitimacy that opens doors to major auctions, private treaty sales, and institutional acquisition. And institutions think differently than individuals, because they acquire objects not just for ownership but for preservation, education, and prestige. And when an institution identifies a coin as representing an irreplaceable chapter in mint history, price becomes negotiable rather than fixed, and this institutional interest is one of the strongest drivers behind eight-figure theoretical valuations, because it introduces buyers who are not constrained by traditional collecting budgets. And the psychological power of the 1994 P-quarter legend lies in its familiarity, because it looks like something anyone could have handled, reinforcing the dream that life-changing value might be hiding in plain sight. And that dream fuels constant searching, roll hunting, and discussion, keeping the story alive even decades after the coin's release. And emotional engagement is not a side effect in numismatics, it is a core driver of value, because people pay extraordinary sums not for metal, but for meaning, and the meaning of a modern-era coin is tied to chance, imperfection, and the idea that even in an age of advanced technology, mistakes still slip through, carrying stories that outlive their makers. And whether or not a 1994 P-quarter ever officially sells for $28 million, the possibility alone reshapes how collectors view modern coinage, reminding everyone that rarity is not limited to the distant past, and that sometimes the most valuable treasures are born from moments when machines falter, oversight slips, and history is quietly minted into existence. Because that quiet minting of history is what keeps the 1994 P-quarter alive in the imagination of collectors, researchers, and everyday people who suddenly realize that perfection is not guaranteed even in the most controlled environments. And this realization opens the door to deeper analysis of how the Philadelphia Mint operated during the mid-1990s. A period marked by relentless output goals, tightening budgets, and the gradual modernization of equipment that had to bridge old mechanical systems with newer automated processes, a transition phase that is notorious in manufacturing for producing irregularities, because when systems overlap, tolerances clash, and calibration drifts, anomalies emerge, and those anomalies, when preserved on a coin, become permanent evidence of a moment when production slipped just enough to create something extraordinary. And one of the most compelling theoretical drivers behind the $28 million valuation is the idea that a single 1994 P-quarter could exist that combines a wrong planchet strike with additional visible errors, a convergence so rare that it effectively eliminates any meaningful population estimate, because once multiple independent failures occur on the same strike, probability collapses, and probability collapse is where numismatic legends are born. And collectors evaluating such possibilities focus heavily on metallurgical signatures, because metal composition does not lie, and advanced testing can reveal alloy ratios, trace elements, and density patterns that conclusively prove whether a coin was struck on an unintended blank. And when such data confirms an anomaly that cannot be explained by post-mint alteration, skepticism gives way to awe, and awe fuels demand, and demand fuels price escalation, especially when the coin's appearance visually reinforces the data, showing unusual surface reflectivity, strike depth, or coloration that instantly distinguishes it from standard clad quarters. And the edge examination becomes critical here, because the absence, reduction, or distortion of the copper core stripe can indicate bonding failures or completely different planchet origins, and these physical traits are impossible to fake convincingly at the microscopic level, which is why they carry so much weight in high-end evaluations, and beyond composition. Strike anomalies such as extreme off-center strikes add dramatic visual impact, where large portions of the design are missing yet key identifying elements like the date remain visible, a balance that is essential for value, because an error coin must still be identifiable to be desirable, and a perfectly balanced off-center 1994 P-quarter in mint-state condition would already command serious attention, but when layered with other anomalies, it becomes the kind of object that transcends standard pricing models. And standard pricing models simply do not apply when a coin becomes a conversation piece rather than a commodity, and the conversation around the 1994 P quarter is further intensified by the fact that Philadelphia minted quarters of this era lack a mint mark, forcing experts to rely on subtle diagnostics like die characteristics, strike style, and metallurgical consistency to confirm origin, and this difficulty adds credibility to any verified discovery, because it demonstrates that the coin has been scrutinized exhaustively before acceptance, and exhaustive scrutiny builds trust, and trust is the currency of multimillion-dollar transactions, because buyers at that level are not gambling, they are securing certainty, and certainty transforms speculation into confidence, and confidence attracts institutions, private collectors, and investors who view rare coins as portable history, and portable history carries unique appeal because it can be preserved, displayed, insured, and passed down without losing relevance. And relevance is key, because a coin that continues to be discussed, researched, and debated retains cultural energy, and cultural energy sustains value across generations, and the 1994 P quarter's story benefits enormously from this dynamic, because it exists at the crossroads of modern familiarity and mythic potential, making it accessible in concept yet elusive in reality, and that tension keeps interest alive. Encouraging people to learn about minting processes, error classification, and grading standards, effectively turning curiosity into education, and education deepens engagement, and engagement ensures longevity, and longevity is what ultimately separates fleeting hype from enduring legend, and historical precedent reinforces this trajectory, because some of the most valuable coins in existence were once dismissed as mistakes or curiosities before time, scholarship, and scarcity elevated them into icons. And the same pathway remains open for a 1994 P quarter that defies expectation in the right way, because numismatics has never been static. It evolves as new discoveries challenge old assumptions, and modern era coins are increasingly recognized as legitimate historical artifacts rather than novelties, a shift that expands their audience beyond hobbyists to museums, educators, and cultural institutions, and when those entities take interest, valuation frameworks expand accordingly, because the coin is no longer just collectible. It is representative, a physical witness to the realities of mass production, human oversight, and technological limitation, and representation carries weight, because it anchors abstract concepts in tangible form, and tangible form is what museums and archives seek to preserve, and if a unique or near-unique 1994 P quarter were to enter that space, its value would be driven not by face denomination or even metal content, but by its ability to tell a story that no other object can tell. And stories are priceless when they are singular, and singularity is the ultimate prize in collecting, because it cannot be diluted or replicated, and that is why the idea of a $28 million 1994 P quarter persists, not as idle fantasy, but as a logical extension of how rarity, error, condition, certification, narrative, and demand intersect at the highest levels of the market, reminding everyone that history does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it slips quietly into circulation, disguised as something ordinary, waiting for the moment when someone looks closely enough to recognize that a small piece of metal carries a story far larger than its size, a story of imperfection, chance, and the extraordinary value that can emerge when the ordinary goes just slightly wrong. Next, 1994 D Washington quarter dollar, we are diving into another astonishing modern coin mystery that has captured the imagination of collectors around the world, the 1994 D Washington quarter dollar, a coin struck at the Denver Mint in enormous quantities yet surrounded by persistent theories, documented anomalies, and legendary speculation suggesting that under the rarest and most extreme circumstances, a single example could reach a jaw-dropping valuation of $28 million, a number that sounds impossible until you understand how modern minting works, how fragile perfection truly is inside high-speed industrial environments, and how a single deviation from the plan can transform a common coin into a once-in-a-generation artifact. Because 1994 was a year of relentless production pressure for the U.S. Mint, with Denver operating at near maximum capacity to satisfy nationwide demand for circulating quarters, pushing machinery, dies, and human oversight to their limits. And whenever limits are pushed, mistakes emerge, not because of negligence, but because volume amplifies probability, and probability is the silent architect of rarity. And the legend of the 1994 decoder begins with this reality, that hundreds of millions were struck, meaning that even a 1 in 100 million error could realistically exist. And when such an error escapes into circulation unnoticed, it becomes a time capsule of failure frozen in metal, and collectors obsess over this idea. Because history has already proven that the most valuable coins were never meant to exist at all, they were born from accidents, and one of the most powerful value drivers associated with the $28 million theory is the possibility of a wrong planchet strike, where a quarter is struck on a blank intended for another denomination, alloy, or even another country, creating immediate and measurable deviations in weight, thickness, edge appearance, and composition, and a standard 1994 decoder should weigh approximately 5.67 grams with a copper-nickel clad structure, so any significant deviation sets off alarms, especially if the edge lacks the familiar copper stripe or the surface exhibits an unusual luster or texture inconsistent with standard clad coinage. And while silver quarters were officially discontinued decades earlier, the U.S. Mint's own documented history confirms that leftover planchets, experimental blanks, and foreign contract materials have occasionally crossed into domestic production lines, producing forbidden coins that redefine entire series. And when such a coin is authenticated through advanced metallurgical analysis that confirms its composition beyond any doubt, skepticism collapses and legend takes over, because at that point the coin is no longer comparable to others, it exists alone, and isolation is the foundation of multimillion-dollar value. And beyond composition errors, doubled die varieties add another layer of intrigue to the 1994 decoder story, occurring when the die receives more than one misaligned impression from the hub, producing true doubling on lettering, numbers, or design elements. And while machine doubling is common and largely ignored, genuine hub doubling that is bold, crisp, and clearly separated is extremely rare on late 20th century quarters, and a dramatic double die affecting the date, Liberty, Indiana God We Trust, or Washington's profile would already elevate a 1994 decoder into elite territory. But when such doubling is combined with other anomalies like off-metal composition, misalignment, or pristine mint state preservation, the coin enters a realm where valuation is no longer guided by price guides, but by imagination, precedent, and competition, and misaligned and rotated die errors further intensify the narrative, where the obverse and reverse are improperly aligned, sometimes by extreme angles that are immediately obvious when the coin is flipped, signaling mechanical failure during die installation or press operation. And while mild rotations exist, extreme rotations on high-grade modern quarters are scarce, and scarcity magnifies everything, because it constricts supply while curiosity and desire expand demand, and struck-through errors deepen the mystique even more, capturing the precise moment when grease, metal shavings, cloth fibers, or debris interfered with the strike, leaving behind voids, distortions, or ghostly impressions that cannot be replicated or convincingly faked, making each struck-through coin a unique industrial fingerprint. And uniqueness is priceless in numismatics, because even the rarest standard coin has equals somewhere, but a dramatic struck-through error stands alone, and when such an error appears on a coin that retains original luster, sharp strike, and minimal contact marks, its desirability multiplies exponentially. Because condition amplifies rarity, transforming curiosity into obsession, and die cracks, breaks, and cuts represent yet another pathway to extraordinary value, where the die itself physically fails, leaving raised metal blobs or missing sections of the design on the struck coin. And while minor cracks are common in high-volume years like 1994, massive cuts that erase significant portions of Washington's portrait or the eagle's wings are rare, especially when found on coins that show little to no circulation wear. Because such dies are usually retired quickly, limiting the number of examples produced, and when a dramatic cut appears early in a die's failure, producing coins that retain sharp detail and mint-state surfaces, it creates a narrow window of rarity that advanced collectors recognize instantly. And recognition matters because at the highest levels of collecting, coins are not merely accumulated, they are curated, and curated objects are chosen for significance, narrative, and long-term legacy, and certification becomes the bridge between curiosity and legitimacy. Because without third-party authentication, even the most astonishing error is treated with caution, but once a respected grading service encapsulates the coin, assigns a top-tier grade, and documents its error characteristics in precise language, the coin crosses into a different universe, one governed by elite auctions, private treaty sales, and institutional acquisition. And institutions think differently than individuals, because they acquire objects not just for ownership but for preservation, education, and prestige, and when an institution identifies a coin as representing an irreplaceable chapter in mint history, price becomes negotiable rather than fixed, and this institutional interest is one of the strongest accelerants behind eight-figure theoretical valuations, because it introduces buyers who are not constrained by traditional collecting budgets. And the psychological power of the 1994 decoder legend lies in its familiarity, because it looks like something anyone could have handled, reinforcing the dream that life-changing value might be hiding in plain sight, and that dream fuels endless searching, roll hunting, and discussion, keeping the story alive decades after the coin's release. And emotional engagement is not incidental in numismatics, it is foundational, because people do not pay extraordinary sums for metal, they pay for meaning. And the meaning of a modern-era coin is tied to chance, imperfection, and the idea that even in an age of advanced technology, mistakes still escape, carrying stories that outlive their makers. And whether or not a 1994 decoder ever officially sells for $28 million, the possibility alone reshapes how collectors view modern coinage, reminding everyone that rarity is not confined to ancient history, and that sometimes the most valuable treasures are born not from intention, but from moments when machines falter, oversight slips, and history is quietly minted into existence. Because that quiet minting of history at the Denver Mint during 1994 is what gives the 1994 decoder its enduring power over the imagination, and the story deepens when you consider how error discovery actually works in the real world, not through instant recognition but through years of slow realization, re-examination, and changing perspectives within the numismatic community. Because many coins that are considered legendary today were once dismissed as damaged, insignificant, or impossible. Until advancing technology, better grading standards, and broader historical context allowed experts to understand what they were really seeing, and the same process fuels belief in the $28 million potential of a truly extraordinary 1994 decoder, because modern-era coins are still being rediscovered, reclassified, and revalued as collectors learn more about mint processes and failure modes. And Denver's production environment in the mid-1990s was especially conducive to subtle but catastrophic deviations, with dies lasting longer than ideal, presses running continuously, and planchet handling systems moving at speeds that left little margin for correction, creating opportunities for bonded layer failures, improper annealing, incomplete strikes, and abnormal metal flow, all of which leave microscopic signatures that trained specialists can identify decades later. And one of the most compelling possibilities discussed among advanced collectors is the existence of a transitional or experimental planchet error, where test materials intended for internal evaluation were accidentally fed into circulation presses, a scenario that sounds far-fetched until one remembers that similar events have already occurred in U.S. mint history, producing coins that later sold for millions because they were never supposed to leave the building. And if a 1994 decoder struck on such a planchet were to surface with full documentation, metallurgical confirmation, and unquestionable provenance, it would instantly become one of the most important modern coins ever discovered, not because of its age, but because of its defiance of official policy. And defiance is what creates mystique, and mystique attracts attention far beyond the traditional collecting world, reaching investors, museums, and media outlets that amplify the coin's story exponentially. And amplification is critical, because value at the highest levels is inseparable from visibility, and visibility turns rarity into cultural relevance, and cultural relevance invites competition among buyers who want not just ownership, but association with a historic moment, and that association becomes part of the object's value, because owning a coin that redefines what is possible in modern minting confers status, authority, and legacy thinking dominates at the multimillion-dollar level. Because buyers are thinking in decades, not transactions, and they want objects that will still matter long after trends fade, and the 1994 decoder's narrative aligns perfectly with this mindset, because it represents a challenge to complacency, a reminder that even in an era of automation and quality control, imperfection survives, and imperfection is where history leaks through, and the fascination also lies in how easily such a coin could remain hidden. Because circulation where can obscure errors, collections can sit untouched for years, and estates can change hands without proper evaluation, meaning that the discovery window never truly closes, and this open-ended possibility sustains interest indefinitely, because as long as quarters exist, so does the chance, however slim, that one extraordinary survivor remains undiscovered, and that chance is enough to keep collectors searching, learning, and sharing information, creating a self-sustaining ecosystem of curiosity that feeds the legend, and the more the legend grows, the more seriously it is taken, because repetition solidifies belief, and belief encourages scholarship, and scholarship uncovers new evidence, and evidence strengthens the narrative, and this cyclical process is how numismatic myths evolve into accepted history, and when they do, valuation follows, often explosively, because once a coin is recognized as historically significant, it competes not just with other coins, but with artifacts across all collecting fields, from art to manuscripts to relics, and in that broader context a $28 million valuation no longer seems absurd, but proportional, especially if the coin is unique, visually dramatic, and impeccably documented, and the Denver Mint attribution adds another layer of appeal, because demint errors from high-output years represent the raw reality of American coinage, mass-produced, utilitarian, and unglamorous until something goes wrong. And when something does go wrong, the contrast between intent and outcome becomes stark, turning a tool of commerce into a witness of industrial vulnerability, and that vulnerability resonates, because it humanizes the process, reminding us that even systems designed for perfection are operated by people and machines that can fail, and those failures, when preserved, become historical artifacts with stories that transcend metal and denomination. And whether the fabled $28 million 1994 decoder ever publicly emerges or remains a theoretical benchmark, its influence is already real, shaping how collectors view modern quarters, encouraging deeper examination of coins once thought too recent to matter, and expanding the boundaries of what is considered worthy of study and preservation, and that expansion is perhaps the greatest legacy of the legend, because it proves that history is not finished, that it continues to be minted every day, sometimes quietly, sometimes accidentally, and occasionally in ways that turn the most ordinary objects into symbols of chance, imperfection, and extraordinary value that far exceeds anything their creators ever imagined. Next, 1993 P. Washington quarter dollar, we step into yet another astonishing chapter of modern American numismatics by exploring the 1993 P. Washington quarter dollar, a coin struck at the Philadelphia Mint in massive numbers yet surrounded by powerful speculation, rare discoveries, and extraordinary theories suggesting that under the rarest and most extreme circumstances, a single example could reach a staggering valuation of $25 million, a number that initially sounds impossible, until you understand how the true value of a coin is born not from its face denomination but from error, scarcity, timing, and the fragile perfection of industrial minting, because 1993 was a year of relentless production demand for U.S. coinage, with the Philadelphia Mint operating under constant pressure to supply circulation across the nation, striking hundreds of millions of quarters at high speed, and when production volume reaches that scale, even microscopic deviations can slip through unnoticed, becoming frozen evidence of a moment when machines, materials, and human oversight failed to align perfectly, and collectors are drawn to the 1993 P quarter precisely because it represents that paradox of modern coinage, appearing completely ordinary while quietly holding the potential for extraordinary deviation. And the $25 million valuation theory begins with the possibility of extreme mint errors that should never have escaped into circulation, beginning with wrong planchet strikes, one of the most powerful value drivers in all of numismatics, where a quarter is struck on a blank intended for another denomination, another alloy, or even another country, producing immediate and measurable differences in weight, thickness, color, sound, and edge composition. And a standard 1993 quarter should weigh approximately 5.67 grams with a copper-nickel clad structure, so any meaningful deviation becomes the first signal to advanced collectors, especially if the coin lacks the familiar copper stripe along the edge or displays an unusual surface texture or reflectivity inconsistent with normal clad coinage. And while silver quarters were officially discontinued decades earlier, U.S. mint history has repeatedly shown that leftover planchets, experimental blanks, and foreign contract materials can accidentally enter domestic production lines, creating forbidden coins that were never intended to exist. And when such coins are authenticated through metallurgical analysis that confirms anomalous composition beyond any doubt, skepticism evaporates and legend takes hold, because at that point the coin is no longer comparable to others of its year, it becomes singular, and singularity is the foundation of multimillion-dollar value. And beyond composition errors, double die varieties add another critical layer to the mythology of the 1993 P quarter, occurring when the working die receives multiple misaligned impressions from the hub, producing true doubling visible on lettering, numbers, or design elements such as Liberty, Indiana God We Trust, or the date itself. And while machine doubling is common and usually dismissed, true hub doubling that is bold, crisp, and clearly separated is exceptionally rare on late 20th century quarters, and a dramatic double die on a 1993 P quarter would already command significant attention. But when such doubling is combined with other anomalies like off-metal composition, misalignment, or pristine mint state preservation, the coin enters a realm where traditional price guides lose relevance, because collectors are no longer comparing examples, they are competing for an object that may have no equal, and misaligned and rotated die errors further intensify the narrative, where the obverse and reverse designs are improperly aligned, sometimes by extreme angles that are instantly visible when the coin is flipped, indicating mechanical failure during die installation or press operation. And while minor rotations exist, extreme rotations on high-grade modern quarters are scarce, and scarcity magnifies demand, because as supply collapses toward one, desire expands unchecked, and struck-through errors deepen the mystery even more, capturing the precise instant when grease, cloth fibers, metal shavings, or debris interfered with the strike, leaving behind ghostly voids, distorted devices, or missing details that cannot be duplicated or convincingly forged, making each struck-through coin a unique industrial fingerprint. And uniqueness is priceless in numismatics, because even the rarest standard-issue coin has equals somewhere, but a dramatic struck-through error stands alone, and when such an error appears on a coin that retains original luster, sharp strike, and minimal contact marks, its desirability multiplies exponentially, because condition amplifies every other factor, transforming curiosity into obsession, and die cracks, breaks, and cuds represent another pathway into extraordinary value, where the die itself physically fails, leaving raised metal blobs or missing sections of the design on the struck coin. And while minor die cracks are common in high-output years like 1993, massive cuds that erase large portions of Washington's portrait or the eagle's wings are rare, especially when found on coins that show little to no circulation wear, because such dies are usually retired quickly, limiting the number of coins produced. And when a dramatic cut appears early in a die's failure, producing coins that retain sharp detail and mint-state surfaces, it creates a narrow window of rarity that advanced collectors recognize immediately. And recognition matters because at the highest levels of collecting, coins are not merely accumulated, they are curated, and curated objects are selected for significance, narrative, and long-term legacy. And certification becomes the critical bridge between speculation and legitimacy, because without third-party authentication, even the most astonishing error is treated with caution. But once a respected grading service encapsulates the coin, assigns a top-tier grade, and documents its error characteristics in precise language, the coin crosses into a different universe, one governed by elite auctions, private treaty sales, and institutional acquisition. And institutions think differently than individuals. Because they acquire objects not just for ownership but for preservation, education, and prestige. And when an institution identifies a coin as representing an irreplaceable chapter in mint history, price becomes flexible rather than fixed, and this institutional interest is one of the strongest accelerants behind eight-figure theoretical valuations, because it introduces buyers who are not constrained by traditional collecting budgets. And the psychological power of the 1993 P-quarter legend lies in its familiarity, because it looks like something anyone could have handled, reinforcing the dream that life-changing value might be hiding in plain sight, and that dream fuels constant searching, roll hunting, and discussion, keeping the story alive decades after the coin's release. And emotional engagement is not accidental in numismatics, it is fundamental, because people do not pay extraordinary sums for metal, they pay for meaning, and the meaning of a modern-era coin is tied to chance, imperfection, and the idea that even in an age of advanced automation and quality control, mistakes still escape, carrying stories that outlive their makers, and historical precedent strengthens belief, because modern mint errors have already shattered expectations and redefined what is possible in terms of valuation, proving that age alone does not determine worth, rarity and narrative do. And if a single 1993 P-quarter were ever confirmed as a wrong metal strike, a dramatic doubled die, or a compound error combining multiple anomalies with pristine preservation, it would not simply be another collectible, it would become a cultural event drawing attention from media, scholars, investors, and institutions alike, and that attention would reshape its value far beyond traditional numismatic frameworks, making the $25 million figure not a guarantee, but a logical upper boundary driven by precedent, scarcity, and competition. And whether or not such a coin has already been found or still lies hidden in a forgotten collection, the legend itself continues to influence how collectors view modern quarters, encouraging deeper examination of coins once dismissed as too common to matter, and expanding the understanding that history is not confined to the distant past, it is still being minted, sometimes quietly, sometimes accidentally, and occasionally in ways that turn an ordinary 1993 P-quarter into a symbol of chance, imperfection, and extraordinary value far beyond anything its creators ever intended. Because the story of the 1993 P Washington quarter does not end with theory or speculation, it continues through the meticulous study, examination, and fascination of collectors, historians, and numismatic experts who treat even a minor anomaly as a clue to the minting environment, the human factors, and the machinery that produced it, because every coin carries a record of pressure, temperature, metal flow, die alignment, and timing, all of which can leave microscopic signatures, and when these signatures coincide in unusual ways, they give birth to coins that defy expectations, coins that collectors immediately recognize as extraordinary, and those extraordinary coins are where true value accumulates, because they are not merely pieces of currency. They are tangible evidence of industrial imperfection, historical circumstance, and sheer chance. And the 1993 P-quarter sits at the intersection of these forces, because Philadelphia in 1993 was producing quarters at unprecedented speed while transitioning through die and press maintenance schedules that introduce small but potentially significant risks, and in an environment like this, minor misalignments can escalate into dramatic errors, such as extreme off-center strikes, rotated dies, missing or incomplete layers of metal, and anomalies in relief depth, each of which tells a story about the process and conditions at the mint at that moment. And the accumulation of these anomalies is precisely what drives the theoretical $25 million valuation, because rarity is exponential when errors compound, not linear, and collectors prize compounded errors far more than single mistakes, viewing them as statistical miracles. And when one of these statistical miracles is verified through third-party certification, it achieves legitimacy. And legitimacy is critical, because at the highest levels of collecting, proof and authentication are more important than provenance alone, and once a grading service confirms the coin's authenticity, documents its errors, and assigns a high numerical grade, it becomes a globally recognized artifact, tradable among elite collectors, investors, and institutions operate on a different logic than hobbyists, because they prioritize legacy, preservation, and prestige, not merely enjoyment. And their interest can drive theoretical valuations to the extremes we discuss, because when supply is limited to one or a few surviving examples, the market for that object becomes governed not by comparables, but by desire, historical significance, and competition inflates prices rapidly, particularly when a coin's visual impact is immediate, dramatic, and impossible to ignore, because humans are drawn to objects that appear wrong, yet intriguing, objects that disrupt expectations, and objects that carry stories waiting to be interpreted, and in the case of a 1993 P quarter, the combination of Philadelphia origin, extreme rarity, potential off-metal strike, double die or rotational errors, struck through anomalies, and pristine preservation creates the perfect storm for a legendary artifact, a coin that embodies imperfection as beauty, mistake as history, and chance as value, and collectors who understand this are willing to invest enormous resources into locating, verifying, and securing such examples. Because the thrill of discovery and the potential of owning something unique transcends ordinary market logic. And beyond the technical and physical characteristics, emotional resonance drives attention, because coins like this represent more than just material. They are symbols of hidden possibility, tangible evidence that life-changing treasures can exist in the most mundane-seeming forms, and that mindset fuels ongoing searches, meticulous row hunting, estate exploration, and global discussion, keeping the legend alive across decades, and the narrative gains further power when historical precedent is considered, because previous modern mint errors, from off-metal strikes to dramatic double dies, have proven that contemporary coins can achieve valuations once reserved for centuries-old or precious metal issues, establishing a roadmap for how a coin like the 1993 P quarter could justify its theoretical $25 million value if discovered and authenticated. And this valuation is not arbitrary, but rooted in the convergence of rarity, condition, certification, visual drama, historical context, and demand, a convergence that elevates a simple piece of metal into a cultural artifact, a collectible, and an investment class all at once. And the fascination continues because this coin reminds collectors that history is not static, mistakes still happen, and the ordinary can conceal extraordinary potential, and the combination of accessibility, theory, and documented possibility ensures that the 1993 P quarter remains relevant, debated, and coveted, influencing how collectors evaluate modern quarters, perceive the limits of mint perfection, and dream about the next monumental discovery that could change the landscape of numismatics forever, because ultimately, the allure of the 1993 P quarter is as much about imagination, chance, and potential as it is about metal, design, or face value. And it serves as a living reminder that extraordinary value can arise from the most mundane objects when history, error, rarity, and human curiosity collide in perfect, unpredictable alignment. Next, 1951 Washington quarter dollar, a coin that, despite being minted over 7 decades ago, has entered modern discussions of extreme value and rarity, with the most extraordinary examples theorized to reach $45 million, a figure that may seem unimaginable at first but begins to make sense when we consider the unique circumstances, minting conditions, historical context, and the compounding errors that can occur during coin production, because 1951 was a pivotal era for the U.S. Mint, post-World War II, a time when production volume was increasing rapidly to satisfy circulation needs while machinery and dies were aging, and when production volume increases under aging equipment, even small deviations in pressure, alignment, or planchet quality can result in errors that survive for decades, and these errors, once authenticated, can elevate a coin from ordinary pocket change to one of the most coveted pieces of numismatic history, and the 1951 quarter is particularly fascinating because of the intersection of historical context and minting anomalies, because during this time, the mint was still operating under relatively manual processes compared to modern automated standards, meaning that human factors, die wear, and planchet irregularities had a stronger influence on the final product. And while most quarters of that year are common and hold only face value, the rare extreme examples with significant anomalies are the ones that have fueled the $45 million valuation theories, beginning with off-metal strikes, where a quarter is struck on a planchet intended for another coin or made of an unintended composition, producing noticeable differences in weight, thickness, edge appearance, and metallic composition, and a standard 1951 quarter should weigh 6.25 grams with 90% silver content and 10% copper. So any deviation from these specifications immediately draws attention from advanced collectors, and off-metal strikes are historically among the most valuable errors, because they defy the mint's intent, creating coins that were never supposed to exist and challenging the boundaries of what collectors thought possible. And beyond off-metal strikes, double die varieties play a critical role in the legendary status of the 1951 quarter, occurring when the die receives more than one misaligned impression from the hub, producing clear and crisp doubling on inscriptions, numbers, or key design elements, and while minor machine doubling is common, genuine hub doubling that is prominent and well-defined is exceptionally rare in the early 1950s, and a 1951 quarter exhibiting such a dramatic double die would instantly enter elite numismatic circles, and when combined with other anomalies such as off-metal composition, off-center strikes, misaligned dies, or exceptional condition, the coin becomes the type of object that redefines theoretical valuation models, because collectors no longer compare it to average examples, they compare it to possibility itself, and rotated or misaligned dies add another layer of significance, where the obverse and reverse designs are improperly aligned, sometimes by extreme angles, making the deviation immediately visible, and these errors are relatively uncommon in mid-20th century coins, especially when the coin remains in high-grade mint condition. And scarcity is amplified because extreme rotations combined with other errors reduce population to near zero. And population scarcity is one of the strongest drivers of astronomical values, because when supply collapses to 1 or 2, competition becomes fierce, psychological factors dominate, and price is defined by what the market will bear rather than any printed catalog, and struck through errors deepen the allure even further, occurring when grease, cloth fibers, metal fragments, or debris interferes with the striking process, leaving voids, distortions, or ghost impressions that are completely unique and impossible to replicate, making each struck-through coin a singular artifact of industrial imperfection, and uniqueness in numismatics is priceless, because even the rarest standard coin can have equivalents, but a compound, dramatic error from 1951 exists in a category alone, and when combined with pristine condition, original luster, and sharp strike, such a coin transcends standard valuation entirely, entering the realm of historical artifact, investment asset, and collectible legend simultaneously, and die cracks, die breaks, and cuts further enhance the story, as the dies themselves fail under stress, leaving raised metal blobs or missing sections of design on the struck coin, and while minor cracks are more common, large cuts erasing portions of Washington's portrait or the eagle's wings are extraordinarily rare, especially in coins with minimal circulation wear, because dies were typically retired before producing multiple examples with severe defects, and when such a coin appears early in a die's failure, it creates a narrow window of rarity recognized instantly by seasoned collectors, and recognition is essential because at the highest levels of collecting, coins are curated rather than simply acquired, and curated objects are chosen for narrative significance, historical importance, and long-term legacy. And certification bridges the gap between speculation and legitimacy, because without third-party authentication, even a remarkable error can be doubted, but once a respected grading service encapsulates the coin, assigns a high numerical grade, and documents its error characteristics precisely, the coin is transformed into a verifiable artifact, tradable among collectors, investors, and institutions globally. And institutional interest is a crucial factor, because museums, universities, and cultural institutions acquire coins for preservation, education, and prestige, not merely for profit, and when such institutions identify a coin as an irreplaceable chapter in mint history, price is governed by competition among motivated buyers, and extreme scarcity combined with institutional interest explains the theoretical $45 million valuation, because supply is effectively limited to one, and demand is driven by collectors and investors who prize singularity, historical significance, and the thrill of owning something that defies all expectation, and emotional resonance drives attention, because collectors are captivated not only by technical details but by the story each coin represents, and the 1951 quarter embodies imperfection, chance, historical context, and the intersection of human and mechanical factors in a period of post-war industrial transition, and this combination sustains interest across decades, fueling meticulous study, roll hunting, estate research, and auction speculation, keeping the legend alive even if the actual coin remains hidden in a private collection. And historical precedent confirms that modern coins with extreme errors have redefined the collecting landscape, creating multimillion-dollar sales from seemingly ordinary coins, proving that rarity and narrative often outweigh age or metal content, and the 1951 quarter fits perfectly into this pattern, because off-metal strikes, compounded errors, extreme die variations, struck through anomalies, and pristine preservation are all documented in mid-20th century coins, making the possibility of an ultra-rare example entirely credible, and whether discovered today or still hidden, the story of the 1951 quarter reminds collectors that history is dynamic, mistakes are preserved, and extraordinary value can emerge from ordinary circulation coins, turning them into symbols of chance, imperfection, and human endeavor, and this convergence of rarity, condition, certification, historical significance, and demand ensures that the 1951 Washington quarter remains one of the most fascinating coins in American numismatic legend, inspiring continued search, study, and speculation, and demonstrating that even a single coin can capture the imagination of the world, transcending its face value to become a legendary artifact capable of commanding tens of millions of dollars. Because the legend of the 1951 Washington quarter continues to grow not only through documented anomalies but through the endless curiosity of collectors, historians, and numismatic enthusiasts who understand that the coin's extraordinary value is tied to both its physical characteristics and the story it represents, because each feature of a coin, from the sharpness of the strike to the subtle variations in metal composition, the depth of relief, the alignment of dies, and even the tiniest imperfections on the surface, serves as a record of the minting process, a moment in time frozen in metal that reflects the conditions of post-war America, the technology available, and the human element involved in production, and this coin, minted at the Philadelphia Mint, represents a fascinating intersection of all these factors. Because Philadelphia was still one of the central hubs of coin production in 1951, operating high-speed presses, using dies with thousands of impressions before retirement, and relying on human oversight for quality control, and even with rigorous inspection standards, the scale of production created opportunities for rare, compounded errors that could easily escape notice, and these compounded errors, such as off-metal strikes combined with misaligned dies, die cracks, doubled dies, struck through anomalies, and extreme rotations, are precisely what can transform an ordinary 90% silver quarter into a legend, because each additional layer of deviation exponentially decreases the population of surviving examples, and population scarcity is the foundation of extreme value, because when a coin approaches uniqueness, its theoretical price becomes untethered from catalog guides, determined instead by human desire, institutional interest, and competitive bidding, and that human desire is intensified by the visual drama of a coin like this. Because anomalies such as missing metal, ghostly impressions, or doubled inscriptions immediately capture attention, signaling rarity even to non-experts, and once authenticated and graded by a respected third-party service, the coin achieves legitimacy, which is essential, because at the multimillion-dollar level, proof and certification outweigh even provenance, transforming the coin into a globally recognized artifact, tradable among collectors, investors, and institutions worldwide. And institutions operate on a different valuation logic than individuals, because they prioritize preservation, prestige, and historical significance over personal enjoyment, and institutional involvement amplifies perceived value, because it signals that the coin is not merely a collectible but a cultural and historical artifact, and when combined with scarcity, condition, dramatic visual impact, and certification, these factors create a logical framework for a theoretical $45 million valuation. Because the market for singular historical objects operates differently from ordinary collectibles, with demand fueled as much by story, legend, and imagination as by technical analysis, and the emotional resonance of such a coin is critical, because collectors are motivated not just by metal, design, or denomination, but by the narrative the coin embodies, the intersection of chance, human error, industrial process, and historical context. And this narrative is what makes the 1951 quarter so compelling, because it represents a time when the U.S. Mint was balancing speed, efficiency, and quality under significant post-war demand, with machinery, dies, and human operators all interacting in ways that could produce anomalies, and anomalies, when preserved in pristine condition, become artifacts that transcend ordinary numismatics, because they illustrate how imperfection survives even in highly controlled systems, turning an object intended for commerce into a witness of history. Industrial experimentation, and human oversight, and the allure is further enhanced by the coin's potential compound errors, because while a single doubled die or off-metal strike is rare, a combination of multiple severe anomalies on a single 1951 quarter is almost inconceivable, and yet history shows that statistical impossibility is not a barrier in numismatics, because massive production volumes and imperfect inspection systems mean that even extreme errors can exist, often unrecognized for decades until discovered in circulation, estates, or forgotten collections, and this open-ended possibility is what sustains fascination, because collectors never know whether the next extraordinary example is in a bankroll, a shoebox, or a long-neglected drawer, and the excitement of discovery drives meticulous study, roll hunting, estate research, auction speculation, and global discussion, all of which reinforce the coin's legend and keep it relevant in both historical and financial terms. And as historical precedent demonstrates, modern and mid-20th century coins with extreme errors have consistently shattered expectations, producing multimillion-dollar sales, proving that age is less important than rarity, condition, and story, and the 1951 quarter fits perfectly into this pattern, because it embodies the possibility of off-metal strikes, dramatic doubled dies, extreme die rotation, struck through anomalies, die breaks, and pristine preservation, all combining to create an object whose significance surpasses its silver content, face value, or commonality, transforming it into a cultural artifact, a symbol of chance, imperfection, and extraordinary value, and the continued speculation, research, and fascination surrounding this coin ensure that its legend endures, inspiring collectors and historians alike to study, hunt, and preserve examples of American coinage in ways that connect modern enthusiasts with the minting processes, industrial history, and historical context of the 1950s, reinforcing the idea that a single coin, under the right circumstances, can change the understanding of numismatic value, create generational stories, and even achieve theoretical valuations of $45 million, a sum that reflects not just rarity but also narrative, historical significance, certification, condition, and competition, all converging to elevate one extraordinary piece of 1951 Philadelphia silver into the pantheon of the world's most coveted coins. Next, 1952 Washington quarter dollar, a coin struck at the Philadelphia Mint during a period of high post-war production yet surrounded by speculation, documented anomalies, and historical intrigue, with theoretical valuations for extreme examples reaching a staggering $45 million, a figure that may sound impossible until one examines the unique circumstances of the era. The minting processes, the possibilities for compounded errors, and the enduring fascination of collectors who understand that a coin's worth is not determined by its denomination or metal alone but by rarity, condition, certification, and narrative, because 1952 was a pivotal year for the U.S. Mint, still balancing the need for high-volume circulation production with machinery and dies that, while advanced for the time, were still subject to human oversight, and the limitations of mid-20th century industrial processes, and when production is high and machinery is stressed, even microscopic deviations in die alignment, strike pressure, planchet quality, or operator handling can create anomalies that, once preserved, have the potential to redefine the value of a coin, and the legend of the 1952 quarter begins with the possibility of off-metal strikes, one of the most powerful value multipliers in all of numismatics. Where a coin is struck on a planchet intended for another denomination, an experimental alloy, or a foreign contract, producing measurable differences in weight, thickness, edge composition, metallic sound, and surface reflectivity, and a standard 1952 quarter should weigh 6.25 grams with 90% silver content and 10% copper, so any deviation from this standard immediately draws scrutiny from advanced collectors, and off-metal strikes are historically among the most coveted errors. Because they are effectively impossible to reproduce and were never intended by the mint, making each surviving example a singular artifact, and beyond off-metal strikes. Double die varieties contribute to the legendary status of the 1952 quarter, occurring when the working die receives multiple misaligned impressions from the hub, producing bold and visible doubling on inscriptions, numbers, or key design elements such as Liberty, Indiana God We Trust, or the date. And while minor machine doubling is common and largely ignored, true hub doubling that is crisp, prominent, and clearly separated is exceedingly rare in mid-20th century quarters, and a 1952 quarter exhibiting dramatic doubled dies instantly enters elite numismatic circles, but the story becomes even more compelling when such doubling is compounded with other anomalies like off-metal composition, off-center strikes, misaligned dies, struck through debris, die cracks, or exceptional mint state preservation, because each additional layer of anomaly exponentially reduces the population of surviving examples. And when population approaches 1 or 2 coins, extreme value theories begin to take shape, because scarcity and uniqueness are the primary drivers of high-end numismatic valuations, and rotated and misaligned die errors add further intrigue, where the obverse and reverse designs are improperly aligned, sometimes by extreme angles that are immediately apparent when the coin is flipped, signaling mechanical failure during die installation or press operation, and while slight rotations exist. Extreme rotations on high-grade mid-20th century quarters are rare, and scarcity amplifies demand because collectors and investors recognize that such combinations of errors may exist in only a handful of examples worldwide, and struck-through anomalies further heighten the coin's allure, capturing the moment when grease, metal fragments, cloth fibers, or debris interfered with the strike, leaving ghostly impressions, voids, or distorted features that are impossible to replicate, making each struck-through coin a unique industrial fingerprint, and uniqueness is invaluable in numismatics, because even the rarest standard coin has equivalents, but a singular, compounded error from 1952 exists in a class of its own, and when this coin also retains pristine mint-state surfaces, sharp detail, and original luster, its significance multiplies, because condition magnifies every other factor, transforming mere curiosity into obsession, and die cracks, die breaks, and cuds offer another pathway to extreme value, as the dies themselves fail under stress, leaving raised metal blobs or missing portions of design on the struck coin, and while minor cracks are more common, large cuds that remove significant portions of Washington's portrait or the eagle's wings are extremely rare, especially in coins with little or no circulation where, because dies were usually retired before producing multiple examples with dramatic defects, and when a coin survives with these features early in a die's failure, it occupies an ultra-narrow window of rarity instantly recognizable to advanced collectors, and recognition is vital, because at the highest levels of numismatics, coins are curated rather than merely acquired, and curated objects are valued for their narrative significance, historical importance, and long-term legacy, and certification bridges the gap between speculation and legitimacy, because even the most remarkable coin requires verification. And once a respected grading service encapsulates the coin, assigns a top-tier grade, and documents its error characteristics, the coin becomes a globally recognized artifact, tradable among collectors, investors, and institutions worldwide, and institutional involvement is a crucial factor in extreme valuations, because museums, universities, and cultural organizations acquire coins for preservation, education, and prestige rather than personal enjoyment. An institutional interest signals that the coin is not merely a collectible but a historical artifact, elevating demand, encouraging competitive bidding, and justifying astronomical theoretical valuations, and emotional resonance plays a critical role as well, because collectors are motivated by the story the coin represents. The intersection of chance, industrial processes, human oversight, and historical context, and the 1952 quarter embodies all these factors, making it a coin that exemplifies imperfection, rarity, and the capacity of a single object to capture collective imagination, and the legend is further sustained by the possibility of compounded errors, because a coin that combines multiple extreme anomalies, off-metal strike, dramatic double die, misaligned or rotated dies, struck through anomalies, and die breaks, effectively eliminates any competition in terms of rarity, and history shows that such coins, when authenticated and preserved, can command tens of millions of dollars in theory or reality, depending on the market. And the ongoing fascination with this coin drives meticulous study, estate exploration, roll hunting, auction observation, and global discussion, keeping the story alive and reinforcing the coin's relevance across decades, because collectors understand that history is not static, that mistakes endure, and that extraordinary value can emerge from ordinary circulation coins, turning them into symbols of chance, imperfection, and human endeavor, and the convergence of rarity, condition, certification, historical significance, visual drama, and demand ensures that the 1952 Washington quarter remains one of the most fascinating and compelling coins in American numismatic legend, inspiring continuous search, research, and appreciation, and demonstrating that even a single coin can transform our understanding of value, history, and the extraordinary possibilities hidden within everyday objects. Capable of commanding theoretical valuations as high as $45 million, not merely for its silver content or age, but for its compounded errors, singularity, and narrative, and the continued pursuit, authentication, and fascination surrounding this coin ensures that its story will endure, inspiring generations of collectors to look closely at ordinary coins and recognize that history, imperfection, and extraordinary value may be hiding in plain sight, in a coin that seems simple but carries the weight of legend, industrial history, and human chance in every millimeter of its surface. Because the 1952 Washington quarter story is far from finished, and in fact, its legend grows stronger the deeper collectors, historians, and numismatic experts examine the convergence of rarity, error, condition, historical context, and the human and mechanical factors involved in its production, because every detail of this coin, from the sharpness of Washington's profile to the eagle's wing feathers, from the depth of the strike to the subtle variations in metallic luster, and from the alignment of the dies to the tiniest imperfections on its surface, tells a story of how the Philadelphia Mint operated in the early 1950s, balancing massive production quotas with machinery that, while advanced for the era, was still subject to wear, misalignment, and human oversight, and these factors combined to produce anomalies that are often subtle yet consequential, creating coins that can exist for decades in circulation or forgotten collections, completely unnoticed until they are examined closely enough by advanced collectors to reveal their full significance. And what makes the 1952 quarter so extraordinary is not simply that errors existed, but that the potential for compounded errors, off-metal strikes, dramatic double dies, extreme die rotations, struck through anomalies, die cracks, cuds, and even variations in strike pressure, creates a scenario where a single coin could simultaneously display multiple rare characteristics, an occurrence so improbable that it dramatically reduces the population of such coins, and population scarcity is the cornerstone of extreme numismatic value, because when a coin approaches uniqueness, price is no longer defined by catalog guides, it is defined by desire, competition, and narrative, and the emotional resonance of such a coin amplifies its appeal. Because collectors are drawn not only to the metal and design but to the story embedded in the coin itself, the story of human oversight, industrial imperfection, and historical context frozen in silver, and these stories are what elevate coins like the 1952 quarter into legends capable of commanding theoretical valuations of $45 million, because collectors, investors, and institutions recognize that such coins are not simply objects of commerce, but artifacts of industrial history and chance, rare witnesses to the intersection of mechanical production and human error, and the scarcity of surviving examples makes them virtually priceless. particularly when authenticated and graded by respected third-party services, whose encapsulation and certification transforms speculation into legitimacy. And legitimacy is critical at this level because buyers of multimillion-dollar coins demand irrefutable proof of authenticity, condition, and error characteristics, and once verified, the coin enters a global arena of collectors, private investors, and institutional buyers who compete for ownership, driving valuations far beyond what conventional collectors might imagine. And institutional involvement adds another layer of validation, because museums, universities, and cultural organizations acquire coins for preservation, education, and prestige, and their interest signals to the market that the coin is not merely collectible, but historically and culturally significant, further justifying extraordinary valuations. And beyond technical details, visual impact plays a pivotal role, because anomalies such as ghostly impressions, missing metal, extreme die rotations, or bold doubled dies are immediately noticeable, even to non-experts, reinforcing the perception of rarity and uniqueness. And when these visual anomalies coincide with exceptional mint state preservation, sharp strike, and original luster, the result is a coin whose narrative, scarcity, and aesthetic appeal converge to create an object that transcends ordinary numismatics, becoming simultaneously a collectible, a historical artifact, an investment vehicle, and a symbol of chance and imperfection. And the fascination continues because the 1952 quarters compounded errors create an open-ended possibility that somewhere in circulation, in an estate, or in a forgotten collection, a coin may exist that perfectly embodies all the elements necessary to justify this legendary value, and this possibility sustains interest across decades, inspiring meticulous study, roll hunting, estate research, auction monitoring, and international discussion. And this activity in turn reinforces the coin's significance, because collectors are continuously reminded that history is dynamic, mistakes are preserved, and extraordinary value can emerge from the most mundane-looking objects, turning them into symbols of industrial vulnerability, human oversight, and historical narrative. And the 1952 Washington quarter exemplifies this phenomenon because it represents a period in American minting where high production volumes, aging dies, mechanical stress, and human oversight combined to create a perfect storm of potential anomalies, where even a small deviation could yield a coin of immense rarity and value, and historical precedent reinforces the plausibility of this valuation, because similar coins from adjacent years, including rare doubled dies, off-metal strikes, dramatic struck-through errors, and pristine high-grade examples, have already sold for millions, proving that a coin's age alone is not the primary driver of value, but rather the combination of rarity, condition, error, and narrative. And the 1952 quarter's continued allure is enhanced by compounded errors, because a coin that simultaneously exhibits multiple rare characteristics is effectively one of a kind, creating a level of desirability unmatched by most other mid-20th century issues. And collectors recognize that such a coin is more than silver and design, it is a preserved moment in history, a testament to industrial process, and a tangible artifact of chance, human oversight, and the unpredictability of mass production. And the legend is further amplified because the coin is accessible enough to imagine that it could exist in an ordinary collection, a bankroll, a shoebox, or a forgotten drawer, fueling imagination, speculation, and the thrill of discovery. And this narrative drives engagement, discussion, and education within the numismatic community, because the coin becomes a lens through which collectors study minting processes, error classification, grading standards, and historical context, and the ongoing fascination ensures that the coin's legend endures, inspiring new generations to search, authenticate, and preserve extraordinary examples of American coinage, reinforcing the principle that even a single coin, under the right circumstances, can command valuations in the tens of millions of dollars. Not merely for silver content or age, but for the convergence of errors, rarity, certification, condition, historical significance, and narrative. And the story of the 1952 Washington quarter demonstrates that ordinary coins can conceal extraordinary possibilities, that mistakes can endure as treasures, and that chance, imperfection, and meticulous study converge to create objects whose significance transcends monetary value, cultural perception, and even time itself, cementing the 1952 quarter as one of the most compelling and sought-after coins in the world of numismatics, a coin whose legend continues to inspire, challenge, and captivate collectors, historians, and enthusiasts across generations, making it not just a piece of currency but a tangible embodiment of history, chance, and the extraordinary potential hidden within everyday objects.